We'll press that on, and it's going to look like you're rolling away now. 30 seconds, over. Contact light. Tranquility Base here. Tranquility landed.
Some way, when those two Americans stepped on the moon, the people of this world were brought closer together. That it is that spirit, the spirit of Apollo, that America can now help to bring to our relations with other nations. The spirit of Apollo transcends geographical barriers and political differences. It can bring the people of the world together in peace.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins. The Apollo 11 crew. Thank you. Thank you. We have a very special moderator this evening. He's the man who made Good Morning America.
Gentlemen, sit down. Have a seat. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll tell you a little about these three gentlemen. Neil Armstrong is born and raised in Wapakoneta, Ohio. Attended Purdue University, interrupted his education to fly as a naval aviator, 78 missions in Korea off carriers. Finished his Bachelor of Science degree at Purdue, got a master's degree in science from USC. Almost goofed there, Neil, sorry. Well, they know the difference out here. He became a test pilot. You know, obviously, Apollo 11 was part of a puzzle of getting to the moon, and a lot had to happen prior to that. Neil, after President Kennedy made that speech, challenged America, how prepared was America? What did we have in terms of rockets, electronics, technology? How well prepared were we? How great was the challenge in 1961?
It was a...
I think so.
Okay. You hear me? It's Barry, huh? Okay. It was a tremendous challenge. We did know a little bit about rocket engines at that point in time. We knew a little bit about flying outside the atmosphere, but very little. And the challenge of going, instead of Mach number of 6, going in a vehicle to Mach number of 25 and going 200,000 miles away from Earth and being able to operate that was a challenge that we frankly didn't know how to handle at that point.
Buzz, there were 16 missions, Mercury and Gemini, before the Apollo program. What did they have to accomplish? What did you have to accomplish in the Mercury and Gemini missions before the Apollo program could begin?
Well, the Mercury program really established that humans could live in space by themselves and without feeling disoriented. It really proved the man-machine interface. And each of the Mercury missions went a little bit longer than the preceding one. When Apollo was going through the definition stages, they realized just about the time that the Apollo program was announced that we really needed something as an interim. So the company, McDonnell, that built the Mercury capsule was asked to see if they could propose something for two people, and the Gemini program was launched, and it really had several major objectives. One was to lengthen the stay in orbit up to the time that it would take to go to the moon and back. So they defined progressive steps up to 2 weeks, 14 days in orbit. We needed to demonstrate that we could exist outside the spacecraft, so we developed procedures for spacewalks. The Russians kind of beat us to that, and that launched Ed White on his first spacewalk. Then we needed to demonstrate that we knew how to control entry and land at a specific spot. So controlled entry was a part of the Gemini program. And last but not least, my favorite subject, rendezvous of other objects in space, was recognized early in the Apollo program, even before the selection was made of rendezvous around the moon. It was realized that we needed to do assembly of some sort and have vehicles joined together. So those things had to be accomplished, and of course the Gemini program flew about every 2 or 3 months through the 65 and 66, and it was just a very rapid-paced program that gave us time to develop the Apollo spacecraft.
The reason he said that that's his favorite subjects orbiting, his thesis for his PhD was in manned orbiting docking, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Well, not docking, but the bringing together.
Bringing together.
Yeah, we realized that formation flying was going to be relatively easy, and joining together. So it's getting there from about 20 to 30 miles away that's the important thing.
All right, Mike, the missions of Apollo that flew before 11, 7, 8, 9, and 10, the first Apollo manned missions, what did they do that allowed you then to strike out for the moon and land there?
Well, they did everything. They did all the preliminary work that made it seem to us that we could just go ahead and complete that last little bit of descent and actually land. The predecessor to Apollo 11 was a dress rehearsal, which did virtually everything except land, and then before that, Apollo 9 tested out both the lander and the command module in Earth orbit, and Apollo 8 tested the command module all the way around the moon, and the 7 tested it in Earth orbit. So by the time those 4 flights had been completed, we felt confident enough to try the first lunar landing.
All right, now how, from NASA's point of view in selecting the 3 of you, how long range a finely tuned surgical selection process was it to put you 3 men together to make the finely tuned team of unique capability to go do what you did?
David, I wish we could say that that was very cleverly planned to pick the best people to do the job, but in honesty, we cannot say that. Actually, there were very few, if any, extra personnel in our crew ranks at that time. Everybody was assigned to a flight at all times. You got off one and you went on the next. So at the time when they were assigning a crew to Apollo 11, they really were down to the dregs at the bottom of the barrel, and we were...
Wait a minute. You heard it here. Armstrong said that Aldrin and Collins were the dregs. What a way to talk about your crew. Neil, please.
I don't remember it that way, David. I remember that the NASA doctors had predicted that all 3 of us were going to be bald as we grew older, and Buzz has succeeded quite well, and I think I perhaps have done better than he has. Neil flunked somewhere along the line. If we're all to be done again, I don't think Neil would have been on the crew.
Just before you went, I recall seeing the magazine stories and the Life magazine and so forth of you guys with your families, with your children in the garden, cooking out. How accurate were those press stories of you guys, like 4th of July weekend before you went down to the Cape to take off?
Well, my recollection was that the only time we got a few moments to spend in the backyard with our families is when the photographers were there from the magazines. The rest of the time we were in the simulator getting ready to fly.
I got to take my family to Astro World and go through some of the rides. Just about got a little disoriented on some of them.
When you got down the day before you actually launched, what was going through your minds down at the Cape? You'd gone through all the training, months and months, years and years. What went through your minds the night before you actually got into the rocket, Mike, and said you're going to go do this?
Well, when we walked out to the launch pad, I remember I was really surprised because the Saturn V is a gigantic thing. It's bigger than a football field on end, and every time we had been near it before, there was scaffolding, and must have been 100 workmen, maybe 200, all scurrying around, doing things to it, getting it ready. And launch morning, they were all gone. And we even had to operate the elevator ourselves that went up to the top. They had left, and I was wondering maybe they knew something that we didn't know.
It was pretty crowded up there in the White Room, so they didn't want too many people up there, so they put Neil and Mike up there, and they left me down below, about halfway up. All by myself. I was carrying my little suitcase air conditioning unit, and I had about 5 minutes just walking around watching the frost drop off of that rocket, looking out, seeing the sun rise up, and seeing billions of people, and wondering whether these guys were going to leave me behind. No, that was really a moment that I chose to say, I'm going to remember this moment.
Neil, how great was the challenge at that point? Had it changed for you? I mean, you're all test pilots and pros, and you were trained and ready to go and so forth. But at that moment, do you think anything different? Does anything come to mind?
David, that machine that Mike talked about was tall and big and impressive. It was also complicated. It had about 1 million ways to go wrong. So I think in my own mind, I thought, there's no way we'll really get this thing off this pad today. I could just enjoy the walk.
How much explosive power did it take to get that rocket up into orbit?
Well, it had 7.5 million pounds of thrust. I don't know.
I hate to call that explosive power. I don't know about you.
My thought is, when you see that nobody else besides the three of you were within 3 or 4 miles of the rocket, what do you think?
That's not much confidence, is it?
What was the liftoff like? Neil, describe the liftoff.
Oh, it is a kick. You might expect that you accelerate very rapidly and push down in your seat. That's not the case. Saturn was very large, very heavy, and very well suited to take grandfathers and grandmothers into space because it was a very gentle ride. But it was noisy and it was shaky. And for the first half a minute, we could not even hear what was coming over the radio very well because of not only the sound of the engines, but the reflected sound from the ground that was reaching up to the spacecraft. That as we flew through 500 feet, then the communication became much better.
Mike, how was the trip to the moon? How long did it take to actually get up to moon orbit?
Well, it takes a couple of days to get there. We spent a few hours in Earth orbit just checking everything out, and once we were sure everything was working okay, then we used our third stage. We reignited it and got going faster. It takes more speed, of course, to get to the moon. For some reason, we measured speed in feet feet per second. I don't know why we picked that instead of something sensible like furlongs per fortnight. But anyway, it took 36,000 feet per second, 25,000 miles an hour, and that means that you leave the Earth very rapidly, but the Earth is still pulling at you, so you slow down, and then about 3/4 of the way there, the moon grabs you, and you start picking up speed, and then we went into orbit around the moon. It takes about 3 days.
How was the trip there, and how friendly were the three of you with each other at this point, squished into that little thing going fast to the moon? How was it, Buzz?
Well, when we get into zero gravity and we took the suits off and sort of had glorified underwear on and could lower the couches down, there's really quite a lot of room in there when you figure that you could curl up in a ball and do a somersault in there without hitting any of the edges. There really was a fair amount of room. Going en route to the moon, we wanted to even out the temperature from the sun. So we pointed perpendicular to the sun like that light over there, and then also perpendicular to the Earth, and then did a slow roll. Was it 1 RPM, something like that? And it let us look out the side windows and see gradually, first the sun would go by and cast its shadow, then a little bit later you'd see the Earth moving by, and then you could see the moon. And we had this, these half a binocular or a monocular, and I found that I could hold it in front, looking out, and if I was very careful, I could release it and look through and see the Earth through the monocular without any interference from my own hand. And that was really the best way. And we entertained ourselves with little tricks like that.
Neil, was anything that happened on the way up to the moon that was unusual, untoward, embarrassing, funny, testy that you want to share with us now for the first time ever?
For the first time ever. We, on a departure from Earth, we saw an object flying along beside us. Now, this is news. It was blinking. And, of course,
Not out my window.
it was, didn't take us long to figure out that it was the panel that had previously been covering the lunar module on the outside, and when they were blown off of the spacecraft, they would rotate and catch the reflection of the sun. And they followed us for quite a long time, since they were going the same speed.
You get up to the moon, you separate Buzz and Neil, and you're going to get down to the moon. How did that go? Mike, did that go okay?
It didn't feel so good to me, no. I was, I felt like I was sending these two guys off, and I wasn't sure where they were going or how it was going to work out for them or when they'd be back. It was kind of like, parents sending your kids out on a first date or something.
You had some problems, Neil and Buzz, getting down to the surface. What happened? What went wrong, and how did you fix it?
Well, it wasn't too obvious to me, but Buzz had a little problems with his computer, and he may recall better than I what he saw.
Buzz, what was supposed to happen and what didn't happen that you had to deal with?
Well, I had the displays of two different computers. One was between Neil and I. I was on the right and he was on the left. And that was the primary guidance. And I had another computer display over here. Plus, the assignment of the task was such that as we got closer to the ground, Neil was looking out the window, and he had marks on the window so he could see where we were going and compare that with where we were hoping to go and identify landmarks. So his primary task was one of piloting the spacecraft by looking out the window. And in order to do that successfully, I had to relay to him the maximum information I could see. Well, shortly, about halfway down the descent, we started getting a program alarm and a display that indicated that there was something a little wrong with the computer, and we didn't understand really what it was. It turned out that some of those things had been rehearsed in some of the simulations earlier, but we didn't really understand exactly what it was. And the net result was that it blanked the display, and I couldn't see what it was. But there was also something going wrong with the computer, and when we hit the proceed button, it would clear the display, and then it would go on as normal. But of course, we were hoping that somebody back in Houston would understand a good bit more about what the problem was than we did, and they would be able to give us a clearance to go ahead and proceed with the landing.
And the computer was saying, we've got a problem here, but it's not my fault.
So, Neil, at what point was the lander, essentially the computer, supposed to essentially land you?
The autopilot and computer combination had the ability to land completely automatically. However, the computer could not tell what the nature of the surface, the landing surface was. And if it was going to stick one of the landing legs in a crater, it couldn't know that. So no pilots ever wanted to trust their fate completely to the computer. Schedules or studies here on Earth that indicated that about 1 in someplace between 1 and 7 and 1 to 20 would turn over when they landed. So I guess it's not surprising that no pilot ever let the autopilot land the machine.
So how fast were you going, and then at what point did you take over manually to land?
Well, the final approach is very much like a helicopter in the shape of the approach. We took over at someplace between 500 and 1,000 feet, I'd say, and flew the last mile or so manually.
How much fuel did you have left?
We had not much. When the gas tank reads empty, you still got a gallon left.
When you landed, Buzz and Neil, and shut down the engine, describe how you felt.
There was a sense of relief. There were several discrete points after we shut down when, if we had to leave for some reason, if there was a leak or something going wrong, there was certain opportune times when we could still leave and catch Mike as he was kind of going over the horizon. But if we waited a little bit past about 2 minutes, why then Mike was so far gone that it was best to wait until he came around again, which is about 2 hours. And it turns out that we didn't fully realize what was going on back in Mission Control, but they were really concerned about the temperature and pressure in the fuel line, and they sent a few requests up to us and checked this position and checked that valve, but they didn't want to alarm us, and evidently there was going on there some serious consideration of having us abort immediately because of the higher temperature they thought might cause an explosion in the descent stage. Fortunately, whatever it was, some frozen helium along with some fuel clogged up in the line, it cleared itself up before they could give us any drastic instructions.
But David, that's certainly true, and those risks were there, but I felt that same sense of relief that Buzz felt. And the reason, in my mind, was that we'd had 300,000 people in this country dedicate a decade to making that moment possible. And I would be very surprised if some of them aren't here in this audience tonight.
They are.
So for those people, we felt a great sense of pride of having accomplished what so many Americans had worked so hard to achieve.
Neil, when you actually, went down the ladder and stepped on the surface of the moon, you spoke that line. When did you write that line? How did it come about? And how concerned were you that you might forget it and screw it up? Or did you write it on your glove?
David, there were all kinds of reliability statistics for our spacecraft and probabilities of success or failure. But independent of all the calculations, my own personal sense was that we had about a 90% chance of getting back to Earth safely and an even money chance of successfully landing on the surface. So with only an even money chance, I didn't spend any time thinking about what I'd say after we touched down. It wasn't until after that occurred that I afforded myself the luxury of thinking about that.
But when did you write that line? You wrote it, didn't you?
I never wrote it.
Well, in your head.
In my head.
In your head. But you dreamed it up, didn't you? Somebody didn't give it to you.
No, you have to blame me for it.
But he just mentioned, Mike, probabilities and chances. When I hear that line of President Kennedy's, the second half of it, and return safely to Earth, seems to be somehow the more compelling half of that statement. What were you thinking about their chances of getting off the moon when you were orbiting the moon?
Well, I thought they were good. I hesitate to put a number on it. I always thought of the flight to and from the moon as being a very long and fragile daisy chain of events, and the problem was any broken link in that chain, and the whole chain was no good. The link that I was worried most about was not their actual liftoff, but that once they had lifted off, how they were going to make the maneuvers to come back to me. For example, if one of their gyroscopes had been tilted a little bit and they went off into some lopsided sideways orbit, that was just too bad. Neither they nor I had the fuel to make those corrections to bring the two vehicles back together. So that rendezvous process was the part of the whole flight that had me the most concerned.
Neil, describe what it was like on the moon, would you? What were your kind of reactions to what you found when you got there? Tell us what it was like. Take us there as best you can, what it was like there and what it was like to look back at Earth from there, too.
Well, there were many things we didn't know about what the surface might be, some things that we did know. We knew that the optical properties of the moon were such that you get a very high level of reflected light along the sun line, and we were worried about that blinding our ability to pick out a good landing area. So we landed in the early morning with the sun about 12 degrees above the horizon. So the shadows would be long and the depth of perception would be the best we could have it. Many people have since said to me they remember looking out at that full moon, but it wasn't full at the time. As a matter of fact, the moon was almost identical to what it is tonight, and I think it's up here. Can you see it up there still? And I think it's very nice of our host to arrange to have it up there in the proper position and shape it was on that night 25 years ago.
What was it like looking back at the Earth?
Another thing that most people recognize but forget is that the Earth is a prominent view from the moon. And it doesn't, unlike the sun, which rises in the east and crosses the sky of the west, the Earth doesn't move across the sky at all. It hangs almost motionless in the sky above us. In our case, it was about 7 degrees west of the zenith. Is that about right? 24 degrees, 24 west of the zenith. So every time we were looking up there, there was Earth looking down at us. And it, of course, that's our home, and it's a very pleasant sight indeed.
Buzz, when you took, go ahead, Buzz.
It sure looks a long ways away there at that time to realize that you people and millions times you people are all back on that one little spot out there, and it's sitting up there, and just the three of us. Only two of us are on the surface, and we're walking around, and more people are paying attention to us than have ever paid attention to two people in the world. And yet we're further away. Usually it isn't that way at all.
Buzz, when you took that picture, Neil, when you took the picture of Buzz standing by the flag, Buzz, what was going through your mind? What were you thinking about?
Well, I was thinking that the flag was the wrong way to show up on the film. And the blue field is supposed to be around now. I'll tell you, I was very proud. He was on the wrong side to catch my hand salute. That has to have been, for a military person or for any citizen of a nation, one of the most proudest moments of a person's life, to stand there by the emblem of our nation, and then to have the president talk to us while we're there.
Mike, you were up there orbiting all alone. You're a fighter pilot. So you liked that, didn't you, being alone?
I did, as a matter of fact. I felt very comfortable up there. My concerns were external to my spacecraft. My concerns were more about what was going on the surface and getting them back up. Within the command module, named Columbia, within Columbia, everything worked very well, and it was a happy little home for a day and a half or whatever it was.
Mike,
we got a little bit worried. You know, we couldn't identify a landmark out there, but they intentionally picked the smoothest spot possible on the moon for us to land. But still, when we were there, we didn't know exactly where we were based on any landmark. But we certainly hoped that Mike would be able to use his keen fighter pilot eyes, look through the sextant, and see us. But when orbit after orbit, we kept hearing that Mike had no idea where we were. He couldn't see. Then, I'll tell you, we began to worry.
Little cousin Raycaz, yeah.
Mike, describe, would you, for us, what it was like for you to look back at Earth?
Well, the Earth looks like your thumbnail. You got an average thumbnail and an average arm, and you hold your arm out as far away from your face as you can. That's how big the Earth is when seen from the moon. It's not very big. If you can find the Earth. I mean, if you look out the wrong window, you don't see anything. Just black everywhere you look. But if you swing around and bring the Earth into view, that's how big it is. Primarily blue and white. You see the blue of the oceans, the white of the clouds. You don't see the land as well as you might imagine. I mean, you can see it, but the sort of greenish color of the land tends to get covered by white clouds or sort of blend into the blue of the ocean. So what you see is a tiny little sphere, blue and white, very shiny. It shines like a little headlight. We think a full moon is pretty bright, but proportionately, the Earth is about 4 times as bright. It bounces about 4 times as much sunlight. So this very shiny little headlight is down there, blue and white, very beautiful. And then for some reason, I can't explain it, it has an element of fragility to it. It looks very fragile.
When you look at the moon, unless you know what time it is by looking at your watch and what time it is back in Houston, chances are you don't really know what part of the Earth you're looking at. It's turning slowly, 24 hours in one revolution. But it really is very difficult to tell the continents apart one from the other.
How confident were you when you blasted off from the moon, the ascent stage, to go back up to join Mike, that it was going to work, Neil?
That's a very critical part. I'd worried about it for a couple of years before, but once we got in, as Buzz said, on the #1 position for takeoff, and we're ready to go, we didn't have any concerns about it. Fortunately, it was a relatively simple technical achievement compared to descent, but you always have to be worried because it seems to be the easy ones that get you in trouble, and we were giving it our proper attention.
You came back, went into hibernation?
Quarantine.
Quarantine. How long were you in quarantine?
Well, the
Not long enough.
21 days from the time we left the surface of the moon.
What was your reaction to what had happened down here on Earth when you realized what had gone on watching you up on the moon?
Well, I remember one particular instance. It was right after we got on the carrier, and we got out of our suits and took a quick shower, and then the flight surgeon who was with us had some tapes or something that, I don't know whether they had cassettes or anything like that, that showed what the television was showing you people while we were up there. And he said, how'd you like to look at what's happening? We're waiting for the president to get ready for an award ceremony. So anyway, they started showing what was on the television while we were up there. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I just looked at this view, and I remember saying to Neil, hey, look, we missed the whole thing. And I didn't realize what I was saying at the time, almost. But what was going on that was important was going on back here. It was the impact of what happened up there on the moon that touched so many millions and millions of lives back here that was the importance of Apollo. And the lives that were changed because they witnessed that event. We took part in it, yeah. But you guys also shared in that, and because of that, you shared that event, and that changed your life also.
I think a lot of us, when there are people that we've never met personally in different professions, we tend to kind of lump people together and we say, well, they're Apollo astronauts, they're ball players, they're doctors or whatever. Obviously, you all share a lot of qualities, but you're also different from one another. Mike, in just a couple, if you had to pick a couple of words to describe these other two gentlemen, what one or two words would you describe? How would you describe Neil? How would you describe Buzz?
Both very smart, very competent, very well trained, and a pleasure to fly with.
Buzz?
I'm not going to touch that one. Ditto. Very intelligent. Both highly qualified test pilots, and I felt just the treat of my life to be able to share the experience with these two outstanding people.
Neil, how would you describe them now that they've both copped out?
Well, they'd be the crew I'd pick again if I had another chance.
There were several more Apollo missions, but a number of people said that that the program did not ultimately fulfill its highest hopes. How accurate is that? What did we learn from Apollo? What did we accomplish with Apollo, Neil?
Well, in a way, the Apollo program accomplished its goals too well, and people became very satisfied with their ability to do these kinds of things when they wished successfully, and consequently they only needed to do them when they had a specified goal that everyone agreed on. And there's some truth to that, but I think all of us believe that those years were beneficial to us personally. They were beneficial to our industrial community, our academic institutions, and beneficial to us as a nation, and we were certainly delighted to be a part of it.
How much commitment does our country have to space and the exploration of space today?
I think many of us who were part of the space program in its early formative days were caught up with the rapid activities one after another, and setting an objective and a goal and achieving it the way we did. Felt a little let down that after we flew the last mission on that Saturn rocket, which was a joint mission with the Soviets, that we went almost 6 years before we flew. And I want everyone to remember that. That's a long time for a nation that had achieved what we had achieved during the Apollo program. And I just have a sense that we feel that the program is not doing what it could do. There are a lot of compromises here and there. The shuttle isn't quite as safe as we'd like it to be. It isn't as cheap as we'd like it to be, and it just doesn't fly as frequently. I think a number of us feel a little let down that the program hasn't advanced the way we felt it would.
Mike, same.
Well, I think that, of course, the primary responsibility of the government is to take care of conditions here on Earth, and God knows we have enough problems here on Earth. I think we ought to spend the vast majority of our money on that, but not every last penny. I mean, I think we ought to spend perhaps 98, 99% on terrestrial problems, but I think we're making a terrible mistake. We don't save just a tiny little bit, some 1%, to invest in the future, to invest in space. I think there are benefits, both tangible and intangible. You find things like nurses in hospitals able to monitor 8 or 10 critically ill patients because of some of the instrumentation that's come from the space program. On the intangible side, it's just a feeling of the spirit. I think it lifts people's spirits not to have any plate over their head, not to have any limits, to be able to look out and to think that, one day we'll go wherever we can see up there. If we see something interesting, we can go there. And I think that causes a celebration of the spirit that we should not be without.
Gentlemen, what's the question that's been asked of you most in the last 25 years, do you think?
I think the question I most frequently hear is, what was it like? And it's a difficult question because it's not quite like anything we know here on Earth. But the moon is a wonderful place to go. The surface isn't good, but the gravity is wonderful. And there will be a lot of people in the future who will have the pleasure of going there, visiting that place as we have, and looking at Earth from that distance, and we'll all be the better for it.
Buzz, toughest question, or toughest and or most frequently asked of you over the years?
Well, in addition to what it was like, or what did it feel like, I guess there's a question of would you go again? And I think all of us realize that your life has changed when you have something like that happen in it. And as I look back, there's no way that I would give up that opportunity. I'd love to be able to do it again, but it takes a lot of training, and a lot of other people would like to go. I don't think any of us would trade anything for the experience that we've had.
Buzz, how difficult was it to go from relative anonymity to ticker tape parade in New York and the kind of, celebrity that all three of you have achieved just as a result of that 6-day period? How difficult was that?
Well, it's probably harder than going on a mission.
Mike, how about for you?
Well, I've always thought that in life you're usually too old or too young to do what you want to do. I mean, I can remember growing up, you're always too young. Oh, you can't do this out here. You're too young. You're too young. You're too young. One night you go to bed and this big pendulum in the sky flips over, and you wake up the next morning. You're too old to do anything that you want to do. And we fortunately were caught right in mid-swing on the pendulum. All three of us were born in 1930, and that just happened to be the right age when Apollo came along. So my predominant reaction, just personally, is I feel lucky, lucky, lucky.
Neil? How tough? I understand you are a very private man. I've read a lot about how tough it was to get to know Neil Armstrong. And you'd never know it today. How difficult was it for you to go from the...
There's a price to be paid by being recognized and known by everyone, but that was a small price to pay. And if I had it to do over again, I'd still love to take the trip again if it made that afterlife 10 times worse.
Gentlemen, your last thoughts as you have an opportunity to speak to thousands of people here 25 years after you made that historic trip. What are your thoughts today as you look back over it? Buzz?
Well, there's nothing that I can do that can change the past, but there are some critical times facing us in the future. And I think some of the decisions that we make in the next few years as to what kind of launch system we're going to have and how much we're going to commit to it and how reusable it's going to be and how efficient and how wise we face those decisions is going to have a tremendous effect on our space program. And if I may not agree with exactly what's being defined right now, I feel kind of frustrated if I can't do anything about it. I think we have some very critical times facing us. There's a great hope that we'll continue to explore outward in space, but there's also a possibility that we may turn our backs on it. And I sure hope we don't do that.
Mike, how important is it for us to inspire young people to learn more about space and the lessons we've learned there?
Well, I would say to young people, keep Mars in the back of your mind. Mars is the closest thing to a sister planet that Earth has. It's a much more interesting place than the moon. It's within our capability to go to Mars, perhaps settle there. And young folks keep that in mind. I wish I were a little younger. I'd like to go.
Neil?
Well, I'm an optimist. Wonderful things to be done out there. We have wonderful, bright young people to go out there and challenge those frontiers, and I think they will. I just would feel remiss if I didn't take this 25th anniversary to express our thanks to all of this country for giving us a wonderful opportunity 25 years ago. Thanks for the memories.
Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins.
Let's give them a big hand. Thank you. They went to the moon for us and made memories for a lifetime. And thank you, David Hartman. Now, if you just sit back, you're ready to enjoy the rest of the evening, and we'll make some more memories for a lifetime. Thank you.